Even when the guitar is properly tuned and intonated, there are still many chords that just sound bad. These less than perfect chords are a quirk of the guitar and the way the frets are spaced, which is also known as the temperament. Now, this Stramberg guitar is fitted with the true temperament system, which is why these frets are squiggly looking. And as the name suggests, true temperament is an attempt to make the temperament of the guitar more true sounding. And on today's episode of the Stramberg Experiment, we're going to finally answer the question if the true temperament system is worth the expense. Now, I know we're talking about Strambergs and true temperament, but in order to really understand the true temperament system, we need to first consider temperament. Although we rarely consider temperaments at all, we see a reference to it whenever we tune our guitars and see A440 written somewhere on the tuner. A is of course a musical note, and every note has a corresponding measurable number, which is called a frequency. The A440 text is telling you that the exact frequency of the A you're tuning to is 440 hertz. Now, A440 is also a quick way of saying that we're playing in equal temperament, which is the standard tuning system for all of Western music, and that's why it's on all of our tuners. The equal temperament system starts with A440 and uses that note as a frequency to calculate the other 11 notes we use in music. In short, the genius of the equal temperament system is that it allows you to play an instrument like the guitar or the piano in any key, and all of the chords all sound good. We take this for granted, but on the guitar you can play a progression in the key of A, modulate to the key of C, so on and so forth, and nothing sounds bad. And that ability is granted to us by the equal temperament system. Now, you'll notice I phrased those last two sentences very carefully. All of the chords all sound good, and nothing sounds bad. And that's because I didn't want to say that everything in equal temperament sounds perfect, because it just doesn't, as you heard in the intro section. And to understand why, we need to look at another famous system called just intonation. Now, if your goal is to have every chord sound perfectly in tune, just intonation is the correct system, and that's because it uses whole number ratios found in nature to create the intervals. If you just look at the frequency measurements for a scale in just intonation versus that of equal temperament, you'll see that one looks a lot neater than the other. And the neatness of the numbers correlates to the perfection of the intervals, which can be heard very clearly.
The pure chord rings true, every interval in perfect harmonic balance.
Now, although just intonation is by definition more in tune, the perfect, crisp tuning has the drawback of not allowing us to modulate between keys. And that's because as we're correcting the ratios for the C major scale, for example, we're ruining the ratios for every other scale. In other words, you need a different guitar for the key of C, C sharp, and so on, which probably wouldn't bother most guitarists since we like to buy a lot of gear anyway. But you also wouldn't be able to play any type of modern music because changing keys in one song is such a common technique. And here's a quick analogy just to summarize that prior section. Just intonated James is a college student, and he focuses all of his energy on biology, so he gets a perfect A+. But to focus his time studying on biology, he had to ignore geology and art, so he got an F in those subjects. Equal-tempered Emily decided to divide her study time equally between biology, geology, and art. She didn't get an A+ in any one subject, but she did pass every class with a B+ or a B-. Now, it's important to remember that neither one of these tuning systems is right or wrong. They just have their own different goals, strengths, and weaknesses. And please also remember this, there is simply no way to achieve perfect intonation in every key on a fretted instrument with 12 notes per octave. If you ever run into anyone who says they claim they can, they are lying to you. It's mathematically impossible. Now, we deal with the equal temperament system because it grants us the amazing ability to change keys, use only one instrument, and so on. But even if we accept imperfections of equal temperament, the standard electric guitar has even more issues because of frets. Frets are laid based only on scale length measurements without factoring in variations in string gauges, the pressure it takes to press down on a string, and so on. And these factors and many others will ultimately impact intonation, and they help to explain why guitar intonation can be extra bad when compared to, say, a piano or some other instrument. Now, the true temperament system is an attempt to make the guitar sound more in tune when playing common guitar keys, standard open position chords, and bar chords. And anyone with experience playing the guitar knows that these can have a tendency to sound off. The system is attempting to correct some of the factors like the mass of the string and the fretting pressure by slightly changing the position of each fret, which is why you can see they're squiggly. So no, we can't get perfect just intonation on the guitar, and that is not what the True Temperament system claims to provide. We are simply trying to factor in the idiosyncrasies of a fretted instrument to get a more in tune sound. It's a fairly scientific approach, unlike some products that are entirely gimmicky guitar magic that we often buy into. On to the tests. Now, truth be told, I almost never play standard bar chords, and I play standard open position chords even less, but more on that later because we have to test the system in the conditions it was designed for, and then later we can see how it holds up to my normal guitar playing. I don't want to influence your opinion of the system, so I'm going to play all the tests first, and then at the very end, I will give you my own opinions. I'll need your help with this in the comments. Can you hear the True Temperament examples? Let me know in the comments below. Now that we heard some of the chords isolated, I want to hear this system in a full band context. And this will establish two things. Number one, it will tell us if we can use our True Temperament guitars with our normal buddies who are playing normal instruments. And number two, we will learn if any of this matters in a context that isn't just solo guitar, because let's be honest, solo guitar playing is the least common place we hear the electric guitar. Also, this video took me a lot of time to create. If you appreciate this level of detail, don't forget to give this video a like and share it with someone who you think will find it interesting. Now, earlier in the video, I stated this. Now, truth be told, I almost never play standard bar chords, and I play standard open position chords even less. So now I want to test if the True Temperament system has an impact on my standard style of playing. I'm starting with a blues from my Sophisticated Blues course, which is an important test because blues progressions use a lot of dissonant chords like dominant sevenths and diminished seventh chords. So we'll learn if the True Temperament system also enhances dissonant sounding chords. This final test is the complete opposite of the blues example, and it uses very pretty, sophisticated sounding, jazz-inspired chords from my Rhythm Guitars level 1 through 4 system linked below. These modern voicings spice up your playing and enhance any style of music. Now that we've heard all of the audio clips, I'd like to tell you my thoughts. I did my absolute best to intonate both guitars as perfectly as possible, but I'm not perfect, so it's definitely possible that someone else can squeeze even better results from the True Temperament system than I did in these tests. But first, let me briefly explain how I came to these conclusions. Before anything, I should mention that some of my academic research has focused on tuning intonation and fretted plucked chordophones, so this is a topic that I've pined over long before trying True Temperament frets. Now, something I learned in my research is that the brains of audience members and even skilled musicians will, to some degree, automatically compensate for small variations in intonation. This is especially true when there's a memorable melody involved because, as we imagine the coming notes, the thing we interpret in our brain is a combination of the actual frequency of the notes and our expectations. And in the case of live performance in particular, the human communal component and all of the emotions involved further skew the perception of the audience and even the musicians themselves. For example, if you ever performed live and recorded that performance, you and the audience may have felt in the moment that the performance was amazing. But when you listen back to it the next day, you may notice you were not as accurate as you and the audience perceived at the time. So although there is a mathematical way to calculate frequencies and intonation, we can't underestimate the human factor and human perception and emotion, which is far more difficult to quantify. While testing the True Temperament system, I continued my normal 90 minutes of morning practice with a standard guitar, and then immediately afterward, I played the True Temperament guitar for an additional 30 minutes, followed by another 2 to 5 minutes back on the standard guitar. And yes, I did track all of this. I did this for exactly 2 weeks, and pretty much the same thing happened after every single practice session. I played a regular guitar and I loved the way things sounded. Then I'd pick up the True Temperament guitar and notice that things sounded extra good. Then when I returned to my normal guitar, things sounded off, but within about 30 to 60 seconds, my brain kind of just forgot and I stopped noticing it. So yes, I could for sure hear an immediate difference when I switch guitars. But just like everything else in life, you quickly adapt to your circumstances and it becomes normal. But as I mentioned before, I've also been obsessed with intonation since about 2014, and the guitar has annoyed me ever since this obsession started. It's annoyed me so much, in fact, that I found my own solution that I've mentioned in many of my videos if you listened carefully. If you watch any of my videos, you will probably notice that I like to play guitar with the whammy bar in my hand pretty much at all times. So when I'm playing guitar, my whole goal is to be able to have the arm in my hand at all times. No matter if I'm playing chords or if I'm playing lead stuff, I like to have the arm in my hand. Thus then, if I want to use it, I can add it in ever so gently. What I found is that the second I introduce a bit of vibrato, a lot of these issues are masked in my brain, and the guitar's imperfections bother me a lot less. And I've made it part of my signature sound, or at least that's what I'm trying to do. Here's an example, and notice how things sound less obviously out of tune when I use the vibrato. But even though this solution has worked for me, if you started from a place of better intonation with the True Temperament frets, the vibrato would probably sound even sweeter and even nicer, so that would be cool. But Strandberg doesn't make a True Temperament guitar with a floating bridge, so I guess I can't really explore that. Now the question is, of course, do I think True Temperament frets are worth the investment? Well, here's the thing. The 6-string Strandberg True Temperament is $3,495 before tax. And I'm going to assume that some of that price is also for the nice top wood that they have on that model. So I'll compare it to another guitar with a nice top, and that one is $2,295. So we're talking about $1,200 of difference. If Strandbergs were my primary instruments and if I liked hardtails, I would probably buy one of the True Temperament guitars specifically for my style of music. I'm attempting to cultivate a solo guitar style with a lot of lush, sustained chords, and I think True Temperament frets would be really fun to explore in that context. So I actually think solo guitarists or people who really like ambient music should give this a try. But since they don't make a True Temperament guitar with a floating bridge, I won't be purchasing one. Also, if I was playing in a wedding band or mostly lead guitar, this wouldn't be the thing that I spent my money on first. For example, I know Steve Vai was and maybe still is playing guitars with the True Temperament system. And yeah, he does play chords in some of his songs, but I doubt anyone listening to him live would hear any difference in his playing. And keep in mind, his audience is largely guitar nerds like me, trying to hear all of these subtle differences. So if they can't tell, I doubt anyone else would tell in that context. On to the Q&A. So this first question has to do with sustain, and he's wondering if the True Temperament frets contribute to more sustain because of the overtone series and all of that stuff. And I did notice that when I was playing certain things, there was a lot more sustain. Now, this guitar is a hardtail compared to the other guitar, which is a floating bridge, and this guitar naturally has more sustain than that one. I could tell that just by holding and playing the guitar. But I did also notice that with certain chords in particular, and I'll add an example right here, the overtone series is ringing in a way that is creating additional sustain. How useful that would be in an actual performing context, I'm not exactly sure, but it does seem to be a thing on certain chords in particular. As a tech, I'm used to taping off fretboards to Dremel polish the frets to silky smooth, like new during string changes and setups. You can do this on a multi-scale board with no issues, but I've never worked on True Temperament frets. I wonder how easy or difficult it is to tape around those squiggly frets if your axe needs a polish. So I did attempt to tape around these frets with painter's tape. It involves a lot of fine movement with your hand to try to get them to fit the right way around the tape, and it's a huge pain. It is possible, but it takes a really, really, really long time. I'm curious as to if they're only really true tempered in a given key. You know how you can tune a piano to a certain key, but it's only a true temperament in that key? Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, there is no way to have 12 frets and for it to be perfectly intonated in every single key. This system is trying to make certain chords and certain keys more in tune There's a list of those chords. I'll try to find it and pull it up right here, and those keys as well. So all of the standard guitar keys and all of your standard guitar shapes are going to be even more in tune. That being said, all of the keys that are not as commonly played on guitar, like for example, G sharp, those things still sound in tune, or as in tune as a regular guitar. So it might be slightly different, but it isn't something that's noticeably bad in certain keys. Well, at least not more so than a standard guitar. A lot of people were asking about whether or not you can do big bends and or vibrato normally. Yeah, pretty much checks out. Bending, vibrato, and even when you're playing guitar normally, you don't really notice any of the frets at all. I've heard that some companies send out a guide with true temperament guitars, which says that open strings should be tuned slightly different for it to intonate properly. Is this true? Well, yes. You don't tune a true temperament system, a true temperament guitar, like you tune a regular guitar. There is a list of offsets that you can program into your tuner. I'm tuning with my Axe FX3, and it was very easy for me to just change the offsets. If you have a standard guitar tuner that doesn't have the ability to change the tuning system, you're going to have an issue. But they also have a set of recommended tuners that you can purchase, and they're fairly inexpensive. Do certain intervals sound weird, unnatural, odd to you because they're more in tune on a true temperament guitar? I've watched a few videos on this subject before and found that certain intervals and chords sound sterile and artificial, as if they're being played by a keyboard with a very good guitar emulation setting. I personally have not found that things sound bad or too in tune. And as I switch back between the two guitars, I just end up liking whichever guitar that I'm playing at the moment because, guitars sound good. Would it sound weird or unlistenable for two guitars to play together? Now, this question is going to be very context dependent. If you're in the context of a band with a keyboard and a bass player and a singer, and you have one guitarist with true temperament and one guitarist without true temperament, it's not going to make a huge difference because there's so many things going on in that mix, especially live. If you were trying to record something for distribution, I would probably use two true temperament guitars or two regular guitars because you can hear a slight difference, especially when it's recorded and you're listening back over and over. When it comes to certain types of other music, like if I was going to play solo guitar with two guitarists and they were both playing a lot of chords, I'm not sure I would use a true temperament guitar unless I had two of those true temperament guitars because it is fairly noticeable when you have things in isolation. But at the same time, some of that difference might actually just be a cool effect. So I don't think it necessarily sounds bad with other instruments, but it does sound different if you listen carefully enough. Is it true that the frets really only work for one tuning? This is partly true. So for example, you could tune down a half step and it would still work. And depending on what your string gauges are, you might be able to tune even further down. But you couldn't just change it to, dad gad, for example, because it will be too different for each string for the system to work properly. So it's for standard tuning, maybe a half step or a whole step above or below, but none of the really crazy tunings. Drop D is also fine. So those were the big questions. For those of you who have a really extended attention span, I have an even longer test at the end of this video, and we have a lot more coming in the Strandberg experiment. By the way, I'm Andre Flood, and I'll talk to you soon.